South Sudan's first Vice President
Riek Machar has been formally charged with
murder, treason, and crimes against humanity.
Tension remains high in Juba, South Sudan.
In September 2025, South Sudan's first Vice President, Riek Machar, was formally charged with treason, murder, and crimes against humanity. 7 years earlier, this same man sat down and signed the 2018 Revitalized Peace Agreement. It was a deal meant to end a civil war that had killed hundreds of thousands and torn the country apart. But today, deadly violence has returned to the Upper Nile. Machar's key people have been detained, and his political movement claims the state is dismantling the power-sharing agreement from the inside. So what happened? I want to tell you the story of how instability is becoming profitable to certain elites in South Sudan and what this means for the people. To paint a pretty good picture of how South Sudan arrived at this moment, I need to take you back to the beginning. We'll start our journey from July 9th, 2011. A new country is born. South Sudan becomes the world's newest nation. After decades of war with Sudan, the South finally breaks away. In Juba, people pour into the streets, flags, singing, relief. For the very first time in generations, independence feels real. And on paper, the country has everything a new state is supposed to have. It has oil, fertile land, it has international recognition and major donor support. But it also has a problem built into its founding. These two guys right here, Salva Kiir and Riek Machar, both forged in rebellion, both armed, both surrounded by loyal commanders, and they are expected to share power at the very top. Salva Kiir is widely identified as Dinka, while Riek Machar, on the other hand, is identified as a Nuer. They fought together against Khartoum, but their movement also split violently in the early 1990s, and that history never disappeared. Then the fracture breaks open. December 2013, Juba, Kiir appears on television and says a coup attempt has been stopped. He is accusing Machar. Machar denies it, but within days, the power struggle turns ethnic. Human rights investigators document killings and targeting of civilians, including in the capital, and the country slides into war. The devastation lasts for years, and it tears the newest nation on earth apart. The death toll is staggering. Nearly 400,000 people. Around 4 million people are displaced from this conflict. But the two men at the center of it all, they remain in charge. By 2018, under intense international pressure, Salva Kiir and Riek Machar sit down once again. They sign the Revitalized Agreement on the resolution of the conflict in South Sudan. Power will be shared. A transitional unity government will be formed. The army will be unified. Justice mechanism will be established. Elections will be held at the end of the transition. On paper, it looks like peace, but there's a flaw built into this new deal. The agreement puts the same rival commanders who drove the war in charge of managing the peace. But they keep dragging their feet. Now, watch what happens next. A pattern begins to unravel. In August 2022, the transitional government announces that elections will not happen as planned. Preparations are incomplete. The transition is extended. Elections are then pushed to December 2024. 2 years later, in September 2024, it happens again. Elections are delayed once more, this time to December 22nd, 2026. Then comes March 2023. President Kiir removes the defense minister, who happens to be Angelina Teny, who is also Machar's wife, and replaces her with a loyal general. Machar's camp calls it a unilateral breach of the peace agreement. At the same time, Machar's movement begins to fracture from within. In 2021, a breakaway faction led by General Simon Gatwek-Dua declares Machar removed as leader of SPLM. Fighting erupts between rival opposition forces, and here's where the strategy becomes clear. Instead of crushing the rebellion, Kiir's government engages it. In early 2022, agreements are reached with breakaway factions, offering amnesty and pathways into the national army. The result is chaos. No reconciliation is possible when two factions are claiming to speak for the opposition. Masha's position weakens without a single decisive battle. His movement fragments. His leverage inside the unity government begins to erode. By 2025, the peace agreement and the unity government still exist on paper, but trust is gone. Institutions are hollow and the rivalry is no longer contained. Then comes the final escalation. Macha is arrested and later formally charged with treason. And this is where this entire story becomes difficult to tell.
Now, South Sudan's first Vice President Riek Machar has been charged with murder, treason and crimes against humanity in a move that some fear could reignite the country's civil war.
You see, there's one common theme when war and instability is concerned, and that is corruption. In South Sudan, the money trail reads like a confession. On September 16, 2025, the UN Commission on Human Rights in South Sudan released a report with a brutal title, Plundering a Nation. It looked at how the state spends and what it refuses to account for. One example was from July 2020 to June 2024, the Ministry of Presidential Affairs spent about $557 million, overshooting its own budget allocation by 584%, all while basic sectors starved. Over that same period, reported spending for the Ministry of Health was about $29 million, and agriculture and food security about $11 million. The report's point isn't just that the numbers are ugly. It is that the priorities are upside down. In national budget data, the Commission found cases where more money went to elite medical services tied to the presidency down to the combined public healthcare system. And then there is the oil. The Commission estimates South Sudan has received over $8 billion in oil revenue since the 2018 peace agreement, adjusted to late 2024 dollars number. But the public still can't see where that money went because the accounting is opaque and major spending happens off budget. One program shows how it works. The government's flagship initiative, called Oil for Roads, had received $2.2 billion in oil revenue by the end of 2024. The Commission says more than $1.7 billion of that appears unaccounted for when you compare the spending to the roads actually built. This leaves the scheme functioning like an off-the-book fund for political elites. And that is where the politics clicks into place. Because as long as this transition never ends, there will be no final reform, no real accountability, no elections that changes who controls the state. And that means the same networks remain in charge of the pipeline. And the money, well, it just keeps flowing. But aside from the corrupt practices, there is one major bone of contention we haven't talked about yet.
South Sudan's President Salva Kiir and rebel leader Riek Machar signed a peace deal on Friday after more than 5 months of conflict.
The 2018 peace agreement promised something essential: a unified national army. Under the deal, roughly 83,000 forces from rival factions were supposed to be retrained, integrated, and placed under a single national command during the pre-transitional period. Well, it never happened on schedule. In fact, it took nearly 4 years for the first major batch of unified forces to graduate. And when those soldiers finally marched in August 2022, the moment exposed the reality of the process. Some recruits were photographed training and parading with wooden replicas of rifles, that is, carved sticks standing in for real weapons. The government blamed the UN arms embargo, but investigators and monitors pointed to a deeper problem. The forces were never truly unified. Despite the new uniforms, command structures remained fragmented. Units stayed loyal to their original factions. Senior officers were still aligned politically. Integration existed on paper, but not in practice. UN and regional observers warned that South Sudan did not have a single army. It had multiple armed forces sharing a name without a unified chain of command. So, when tensions rose inside the government, the security forces did not act as neutral institutions. They reflected the same political fractures at the very top. Now, I know you're wondering, where is the international community in all of this? Well, the answer is complicated and uncomfortable. The 2018 peace agreement had guarantors. Regional bodies like IGAD, that is IGAD, the African Union, the United Nations, and the Troika, that is the United States, the United Kingdom, and Norway. But by 2024, attention was fractured. Ethiopia was struggling to recover from its own devastating war. Sudan had collapsed into open conflict, and global diplomacy was consumed by crises far beyond the Horn of Africa. Then came a moment that captured the contradiction. You see, in 2024, Salva Kiir assumed the rotating chairmanship of IGAD, that is the same regional bloc tasked with overseeing South Sudan's peace process. Formally, the monitoring bodies remained separate, but symbolically, the message was stark. The man presiding over a stalled transition now chaired the forum meant to shepherd it forward. No one intervened. No exception was made. While elites maneuver for power, ordinary South Sudanese paid the price. According to recent UN-backed assessment, around 7.7 million people now face acute food insecurity. Education has collapsed. Over 70% of children are out of school, one of the highest rates in the world. Displacement has become permanent. About 2 million people remain internally displaced. Another 2.3 million live as refugees in neighboring countries. While the peace agreement ensured no full-scale war in South Sudan, it has failed to deliver safety, food, and a certain future.
Over the past 3 months, the developments in South Sudan continued to move in a negative and possibly dangerous direction.
By late 2025, the UN Special Representative for South Sudan warned that the country is now caught between a fragile peace and a return to full-scale war. The warning felt familiar. Kiir and Machar are once again openly hostile to each other. Armed violence has resumed in Upper Nile, the same region where past wars ignited. A UN helicopter was shot down during an evacuation mission, killing peacekeepers. Security forces were placed on high alert in the capital as political tensions spiked. The patterns from 2013 are re-emerging, not all at once, but one after the other. And all the people can do now is wonder, is South Sudan drifting back toward war? Or is it trapped in something more corrosive, sort of a permanent instability, carefully managed, where delay is profitable, peace is optional, and no one with power has an incentive to end this crisis?